A welder thought he was buying a second chance when he paid $1 for a forgotten cabin at the edge of Maple Ridge. What he found wasn't peace. It was a town's buried sin, a brother's lost voice, and a German shepherd who refused to let the truth stay underground. This isn't about ghosts. It's about what survives when love and faith won't die, even when justice does. Watch closely, because every step Max takes leads closer to the heart of a miracle. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Chapter 1. The house at the end of the Rain Road. Rain came down in thin silver threads, tracing trembling lines on the windshield of Jack Miller's old pickup truck. The world outside was washed in gray, the kind of gray that blurred edges and made distance meaningless. The wipers groaned with each pass, and the heater hissed tired air that smelled faintly of rust. Jack sat behind the wheel, shoulders hunched, the brim of his worn cap casting a shadow over eyes the color of old steel. His hands, calloused, scarred, and permanently stained from welding, rested on the steering wheel with the stillness of a man who had run out of things to lose. He was 42, but life had already carved the shape of 60 into his face. There was a heaviness to his movements, a slowness that wasn't age but fatigue, the kind that came from fighting battles no one noticed. Divorce had hollowed him, factory layoffs had humiliated him, and war had left something cold and unspoken beneath his ribs. In the passenger seat, Max lay curled on an army blanket. The German shepherd was 7, large and muscular, his black and tan coat gleaming even in the dim light. His right ear had a small notch, a souvenir from a mission long ago, and his left hind leg bore a faint scar where shrapnel had once kissed bone. Max wasn't just a dog, he was Jack's shadow, his anchor, the only creature that looked at him as if he was still worth following. His amber eyes flicked toward his owner, then toward the blurred outline of the courthouse ahead, as if sensing that something would begin or end today. Jack exhaled slowly and muttered, $1, huh? Let's see what that buys a man these days. His voice was deep but soft, the tone of someone who had learned to talk more to machines than people. He turned off the ignition, and the engine coughed once before dying into silence. Max sat up immediately, ears pricked, as if waiting for orders that never came. Jack reached over, patted the dog's head, and said, "Stay close." It wasn't a command, it was a prayer. Inside the county annex, the air was stale, thick with the faint scent of paper and floor polish. A few locals filled the back rows, men in work boots, women in worn coats, all with faces that looked like they'd been carved from the same cold weather. The auctioneer, a stocky man named Mr. Dalton, stood behind a podium. He had a red, weather-beaten face, a gray mustache that drooped like a tired bird, and the brisk impatience of someone who had seen too many desperate buyers. "Next property, parcel 2207, he said. "Abandoned residential, Maple Ridge outskirts, minimum bid, $1. His voice echoed flatly off the concrete walls. Jack lifted his hand almost lazily. Dalton blinked, surprised, then looked around the room. No other hands went up. $1 going once, going twice, sold. A dry chuckle rippled through the audience, the kind people use when watching someone else's bad decision. The gavel came down, sharp as a nail into wood. Jack signed the papers with slow precision, his name scrawled in blocky letters that spoke more of habit than pride. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Pierce, watched him with a kind of quiet curiosity. She had a narrow, pale face framed by ash-blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, and eyes that carried a look of someone who knew too many small-town secrets. As she taped a brass key to a manila envelope, she said softly, "You can still walk away, Mr. Miller. Houses like that don't stay empty without reason." Jack offered a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, empty things are the only ones I can afford." Sarah hesitated, then slid a worn silver coin across the counter, a $1974 coin, placing it atop the envelope. "For luck," she said, almost as if she meant it. Jack nodded, tucking it into his pocket. Max pressed his nose to Sarah's hand, sniffed, and she flinched slightly before smiling. "Good dog," she murmured. "He knows things, doesn't he?" Jack said nothing, but Max's tail flicked once, as if agreeing. The drive to Maple Ridge took an hour. The rain thinned into mist, the road narrowing between skeletal trees and empty fields. Houses appeared sporadically, most with peeling paint, sagging fences, and chimneys that hadn't smoked in years. When Jack turned onto Rain Road, the gravel crunched beneath the tires like brittle bones. The cabin stood at the end, crouched among bare maples, its wood darkened by decades of weather. The porch leaned slightly to one side, and a single shutter hung loose, knocking against the wall with the wind. Jack killed the engine and sat for a long moment. Max stood with paws braced on the dashboard, nose fogging the glass, tail still. There was no sound except the wind threading through the branches. No birds, no vehicles. The kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, only watchful. Jack pocketed the key and stepped out, boots sinking into wet soil. The smell of damp wood and moss hung heavy. Inside, the door opened too easily, the lock turning smooth despite the years. Dust swirled in the flashlight's beam, but beneath it the air was dry, almost clean. The living room stretched ahead, wooden floors scuffed, but not rotted, a brick fireplace dark with soot, and a rocking chair facing the window, as if someone had just left it mid-sway. Jack's breath caught. Something about that chair, the angle, the indentation on its seat, felt wrong. He glanced at Max, who stood frozen at the threshold, hackles raised. They moved from room to room, a small kitchen with avocado green cabinets straight out of the 70s. A calendar pinned to the wall, March 1991. A single cup still in the sink, cracked but upright. In the bedroom, a dresser drawer hung open. Inside, a pair of men's work gloves covered in fine dust. Jack's throat tightened. Every detail whispered of interruption, not abandonment. By the time he laid out his sleeping bag near the cold fireplace, the sky had turned the color of slate. Max refused to lie down at first, pacing the room, nose low to the ground. Finally, Jack snapped softly, "Easy, boy." The shepherd stopped, but his ears stayed tilted forward, listening to something Jack couldn't hear. When Jack switched off the lantern, darkness folded around them. The rain had stopped, but the wind hummed through the chimney like a hollow tune. Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the place press down on him. He thought of Sarah's warning, of the coin in his pocket, of Noah, his younger brother, gone too soon in a work accident that had never sat right in his gut. He'd come here hoping for peace, maybe even forgiveness, but peace had a price, and he wasn't sure he could afford it anymore. A creak echoed from upstairs. Jack froze. The sound was slow, deliberate, like a footstep measured to test the floor. Max's head snapped up, eyes gleaming in the dark. The dog's growl began low, steady, vibrating against Jack's ribs where they almost touched. Jack whispered, "It's the house settling." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He reached for the flashlight, thumb poised above the switch, heart hammering like a forgotten engine trying to start. Then came the second sound. Not from above this time, but beneath them. A faint scrape, metal against wood, somewhere under the floor. Max stood rigid, staring at a spot near the fireplace. His teeth bared silently. Jack swallowed hard, the beam of the flashlight trembling in his hand. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Max took a step forward, nose pointed to the floorboards. The scrape came again, sharper, closer, and stopped. The silence that followed felt alive. Jack's breath fogged the air, his voice barely a whisper. "There's no basement in this house." And yet beneath them, something shifted once more. Chapter 2. The Locked Room and the Buried Files. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving the air thick and heavy with the smell of wet wood and iron. Jack woke to silence, the kind of silence that pressed into the skin. Max was already up, sitting near the cold hearth, staring at the same spot by the fireplace where the noise had come from the night before. His ears were rigid, his muscles tight. When Jack stirred, Max's head turned slightly, but his gaze never shifted from that patch of floor. Jack rubbed a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. "What do you hear, boy?" His voice was hoarse, still weighted with sleep. Max gave a low, almost conversational growl and then stepped toward the stairs. His nails clicked on the old floorboards, echoing through the house. Jack followed, barefoot, feeling the cold seep through the wood into his bones. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and old varnish. As Max reached the landing, he stopped and sniffed along the edge of the wall. There, beneath the curve of the banister, a single floorboard was slightly raised. Jack crouched, pressing his palm to the wood. It gave under his weight with a soft creak. "You found something," he muttered. He fetched a screwdriver from his duffel and pried at the edge. The board came loose, revealing a small cavity lined with cobwebs, and beneath it, a rusted iron latch set into a panel. Jack brushed the dust aside, revealing a hatch no larger than a suitcase lid. It had a loop for a lock, but the lock itself was gone. The wood around it was darker than the rest, as though touched many times. He hesitated, fingers hovering. "Someone built this for a reason," he murmured. Max nudged his arm with his nose, impatient, as if urging him forward. Jack exhaled and lifted the hatch. A breath of stale air rose from below, thick with the scent of earth and age. The beam from his flashlight cut through it, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into shadow. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack said under his breath. The steps were made of stone, slick and uneven. Max descended first without hesitation, his tail low but steady. Jack followed, his hand brushing against the damp wall. The room at the bottom was smaller than he expected, maybe 10 feet square, the ceiling barely higher than his head. Shelves lined the walls, and on them sat boxes, each labeled in neat handwriting: insurance, property records, worker claims. A single metal filing cabinet stood in the corner, its drawers slightly ajar. Dust coated everything except for a narrow path down the middle, as if someone had been here recently. Jack's flashlight flicked across the boxes. He picked one at random and opened it. Inside were folders filled with photocopies of deeds and purchase records. Names he recognized from the town's mailboxes he had passed the day before. Families with small farms, machinists, widows. The signatures on the sale, contracts were shaky, all marked within the same few months 15 years ago. Each property sold to Maple Ridge Development Consortium. Jack frowned. Consortium was a fancy word for theft when written in ink that cheap. He reached for another box. It was heavier, and when he lifted the lid, the smell of old paper hit stronger. Accident reports. Injury, construction site, fall from scaffolding, equipment malfunction, each stamped settled in red. Every single one bore the same insurance adjuster's name, E. Holt. Jack's stomach turned. Holt, as in Mayor Nathan Holt, the man whose name still hung on the town's welcome sign. He sank onto an overturned crate, the weight of the discovery pressing against his chest. He flipped through page after page, the rhythm of the papers like the ticking of a clock counting backward. Then, near the bottom of the stack, he froze. A file labeled Miller Noah Incident Report. Jack's fingers trembled as he opened it. The first page was a report dated 8 years ago. Accident during welding operation. Structural collapse. Fatal. His throat closed. He turned the page, reading line after line, words blurring until one phrase burned clear. Negligence claim. Safety equipment intentionally bypassed to meet deadline. There were signatures, 2 foremen, a project manager, and the final approval. E. Holt. Jack's breath came shallow. Noah's face flashed in his mind, the grin smeared with engine grease, the young man with calloused hands and the same stubborn jawline. He had died at 29, working a night shift Jack had begged him not to take. They'd told Jack it was an accident. He'd believed it, because it was easier than believing someone had let it happen. Max moved closer, pressing his shoulder against Jack's leg. The contact steadied him. Jack reached down, fingers digging into the thick fur. "We were supposed to leave it alone, huh?" he whispered. "That's what they wanted." His words broke halfway. Footsteps above interrupted the silence. 1, then 2. Slow, deliberate. Max stiffened, a rumble rising from his chest. Jack switched off the flashlight instantly, plunging the room into darkness. The footsteps paused. Then came a faint metallic click, like a key sliding into a lock. The front door. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears. He reached for the small crowbar leaning against the wall. Max stood ahead of him, muscles tensed, silent now, but alert. The sound upstairs continued, floorboards groaning softly under measured weight. Someone was walking through the house. Jack crept up the stairs, every movement careful. As he neared the hatch, a shadow flickered across the sliver of light above. The footsteps were now near the living room. He could hear the faint jingle of keys and a voice muttering, a man's voice, rough, irritated. Then the front door slammed. Silence returned. Jack waited several seconds before pushing the hatch open a crack. The room above was empty. He climbed out, Max at his side. The first thing he noticed was the smell of cigarette smoke. It hung in the air, fresh and sharp. On the table near the window sat a half-burned cigarette, still curling faint wisps into the air. Jack's gaze moved to the door. The new brass lock glinted faintly, and it was locked from the inside. He walked slowly toward the window. Outside, the driveway was empty. No tire tracks, no movement, just the steady drip of rain from the eaves. He turned to Max, who stood rigid, ears high, eyes locked on something behind Jack. Jack followed his gaze. There, on the floor beside the hearth, lay a boot print, fresh, wet, pressed into the dust, too large to be his, too heavy to belong to anyone who had left long ago. Jack knelt, running a hand over the print. It was cold to the touch. His voice was barely a breath. "Looks like we're not alone after all." Max's tail lowered, his gaze unblinking. The dog gave one low growl that faded into the hum of the rain outside. Chapter 3. The town turns away. The morning light in Maple Ridge was thin and brittle, the kind of light that made everything look older than it was. Jack parked his pickup in front of the county office, the truck's exhaust curling into the cold air like ghostly breath. Max sat in the passenger seat, watching through the windshield, his amber eyes sharp, tail still. Jack straightened his jacket, brushed the dirt from his hands, and stepped out. He had slept barely an hour, the images of the hidden room and Noah's file still echoing behind his eyes. Inside, the county office smelled of paper and coffee gone sour. The clerk at the front desk, an older man with thinning gray hair and a belly that strained against his shirt buttons, barely looked up. His nameplate read Walt Henderson, and his expression carried the practiced indifference of someone who had perfected the art of pretending not to care. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice dry as dust. Jack set the folder on the counter. "These files came from a property I bought. They show forged land deeds, missing insurance money, fake accident settlements. My brother's name's in there. I need someone to take a look." Walt's brow furrowed, but his eyes didn't move toward the folder. "You shouldn't have those," he said flatly. "They were in my basement," Jack replied. "Guess I do now." The clerk sighed, glanced toward a back office, and picked up the phone. "Sheriff's office, please." "Yeah, got someone here thinks he found buried treasure." He smiled faintly at his own sarcasm, then nodded toward a chair. "Wait over there, Mr. Miller." Jack sat, jaw tightening. 10 minutes later, the door opened and Deputy Ray Hollis entered. Hollis was in his early 50s, built like a man who had once been strong and still thought he was. His dark hair was streaked with silver, his mustache trimmed to military precision. The years had carved hard lines into his face, and his left hand trembled slightly when he rested it on his belt. A leftover, Jack guessed, from the car wreck that had killed Hollis's partner a decade ago. "Jack Miller, right?" Hollis said, voice calm but wary. "You're the one who bought the McNeil place." "That's right." "People say that house should have been torn down," Hollis continued, pulling up a chair. "You find anything strange out there?" Jack hesitated. "I found proof this town's been stealing from its workers." He slid the file across the table. "Your mayor's name is all over it." Hollis thumbed through the first few pages, his jaw tightening as he read. Then he closed the folder. "You shouldn't go waving this around, son. You don't know how things work here." Jack leaned forward. "I know exactly how they work. They bury people. My brother—" "Enough," Hollis snapped, his composure slipping. "You've got no proof any of this is recent. Those papers could be 20 years old. Best. Thing you can do is drop it. And if I don't," the deputy's gaze hardened, "then you'll find this town mighty unfriendly." Jack stood, took the file back, and walked out without another word. Max was waiting by the truck, tail flicking nervously. Jack muttered, "They know," and Max gave a low whine, pressing his head against Jack's thigh. That afternoon, the hostility began. At the diner, Linda, the red-haired waitress with freckles and a voice like gravel, avoided his table entirely. "We're full up," she said, though half the seats were empty. At the hardware store, the owner refused to sell him propane. "Supply chain's tight," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. By sunset, someone had keyed the side of Jack's truck, carving a single word across the paint. Leave. Days passed, and the pressure grew like mold in a dark room. Letters from the bank came, thin envelopes with sharp words. Outstanding fees. Failure to comply. Jack had been promised the cabin was debt-free, but now they claimed $3,000 in restoration costs. He stormed into the branch one morning, Max waiting in the cab outside. The bank manager, Peter Sloan, was a pale, balding man in his 40s, with watery blue eyes and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie every few seconds. He smiled without warmth when Jack slammed the notice on his desk. "Must be a clerical issue," he said lightly, but the sweat at his temples betrayed him. "You're squeezing me," Jack said quietly. "You want that house back?" Sloan's smile faltered. "Mr. Miller, we're just following procedure. If there's a problem, maybe you should talk to Mayor Holt's office." At the mention of the name, Jack felt his stomach twist. He left without another word. That night, the silence in the cabin felt heavier than ever. The electricity flickered once, then died completely. Jack cursed, found his flashlight, and went to check the breaker box outside. The main wire had been severed cleanly. When he turned back toward the house, Max was standing rigid by the kitchen window, barking furiously. Jack ran inside. The smell hit him first, gas. The stove knobs were all turned to on. His heart slammed against his ribs. He rushed to shut them off, yanking the windows open. Max barked again, pacing, frantic. Jack grabbed his coat, his bag, and headed for the truck. He'd had enough. He threw his duffel into the passenger seat and whistled. "Come on, Max." The dog didn't move. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping off his muzzle, eyes locked on Jack with something between defiance and grief. "Max, get in the truck," Jack shouted. The German Shepherd didn't flinch. Instead, he walked to Jack and sat, blocking the open door. His gaze held steady, no anger, no fear, just quiet refusal. Jack's throat burned. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "You don't get it. They'll kill us." Max's ears twitched, but he didn't move. The rain thickened, soaking them both. Jack's shoulders sagged. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he touched the dog's collar. "If I run, Noah dies again, doesn't he?" Max leaned forward, resting his head against Jack's chest. That simple gesture, warm, heavy, real, broke something inside the man. He wrapped his arms around the dog and wept into his fur, the rain washing their outlines into the mud. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady again. "All right, boy, we stay. But if we're staying, we fight." Max gave a low bark, as if in agreement. Inside the cabin, the lantern flickered to life once more. The broken wire outside sparked briefly, unnoticed, before going dark again. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine idled for a moment, then faded into the night. And though the house was silent once more, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been waiting, listening for him to make that choice. Chapter 4. The silent ones begin to speak. The first snow came early that year, falling like gray ash over Maple Ridge. It blanketed the rooftops, softened the jagged fences, and hid the ugliness of the town's decay beneath a thin, deceptive calm. Jack stood on his porch, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the flakes gather on the steps. Max sat beside him, fur-dusted white, ears twitching at every distant sound. They had survived another week, though neither could say how long that would last. The radio inside crackled faintly, stuck between stations. Then a woman's voice broke through, firm yet tired, reporting the weather in an even tone. "Light snowfall expected through Friday. Stay safe out there." Jack recognized the name that followed. Olivia Reyes. He turned up the volume. She had once written about workplace deaths in Maple Ridge before suddenly vanishing from local headlines. Now she read weather reports. Sunrise, sunset, humidity. The silence of her career said enough. That afternoon, he drove into town, Max in the back seat. The streets were mostly empty. He parked in front of the Maple Ridge Chronicle, a squat brick building with cracked windows and a faded sign. Inside, the office was smaller than he imagined. Dusty desks lined with paper stacks, a single humming space heater, and one woman typing steadily on an old keyboard. Olivia Reyes looked up when he entered. She was in her mid-40s, tall and thin, with black hair streaked by silver strands tied loosely at her neck. Her olive skin was pale from too many nights spent under fluorescent lights, and faint lines framed her eyes, marks of both exhaustion and defiance. She wore a navy sweater that hung slightly loose on her, as if she'd grown smaller in her own skin. Her gaze, however, was sharp, the kind that once dissected lies for a living. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice cool but not unkind. Jack held up a folder. "You wrote about my brother's accident 8 years ago. Noah Miller." Olivia's fingers stilled. "I remember that name." She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a chair. "Close the door." He told her everything, finding the files, the threats, the gas, the police turning away. Olivia listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. "You're digging up ghosts people around here learned to live with. Holt's got half this town on a leash." "I'm not leaving," Jack said quietly. Olivia's lips curved into a sad smile. "Neither did I. That's why I read the weather now." She stood pacing to the window. "The paper's owned by Holt's cousin. Last time I wrote about workplace safety violations, my house was broken into, my dog was poisoned." Her voice cracked for the first time, then steadied. So I stopped writing, but I didn't stop remembering. Jack hesitated, then set a flash drive on her desk. These are scans of the documents I found. You said you stopped writing, not investigating. Olivia looked down at the drive, then at him. You're either brave or suicidal. Jack shrugged. Maybe both. She sighed. All right, Mr. Miller, let's start with the truth. That night, they worked late in her cramped office. Olivia's fingers flew over the keyboard, eyes darting between scanned documents. Insurance fraud, forged signatures, missing OSHA records. She stopped at one name repeated across multiple files. E. Holt again. He approved all of it. Jack clenched his jaw. He's behind everything. Not alone, she replied. This goes deep. Banks, contractors, even the county office. It's all connected. The door creaked. Both turned sharply. Max, who had been lying near the heater, stood up, tail stiff. The janitor, a thin, stooped man in his 60s, with watery blue eyes and trembling hands, peeked in. Evening, Ms. Reyes. Didn't mean to scare you. Olivia exhaled. You didn't, Harold. We're just working. The man nodded and shuffled away, pushing his mop bucket, humming an old country tune. When the door closed, Olivia whispered, He's harmless. Lost his son in a construction accident 10 years back. Another file that disappeared. By midnight, Jack's back ached from leaning over papers. Olivia printed copies of key evidence, her eyes burning from the light. Max dozed near the door, but his ears stayed alert, head lifting whenever a car passed outside. Tomorrow, Olivia said, stacking the pages neatly. We'll visit the families listed here. They'll talk to you more than me. You've got something they trust. Jack raised an eyebrow. A truck full of bad decisions? No, she said softly. A dog that listens. The next morning, they drove to the edge of town where old mill houses stood in crooked rows. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, jotting notes on a yellow pad. Max had his head out the window, nose twitching at the cold air. Their first stop was a small, peeling blue house with toys scattered in the yard. A woman in her late 30s answered, her face pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes. Her name was Melissa Carter, widow of a factory worker who had fallen during a night shift. Her hands shook as she spoke. They said it was his fault. They stopped my benefits when I asked for an investigation. Jack showed her Noah's file and the others. Melissa's lip trembled. They told me those records were lost. They weren't, Olivia said gently. Then came the sound of small footsteps. A boy of about 8 peeked from behind his mother's leg, his hair tousled, eyes wary. Max approached slowly, lowering his head. The boy hesitated, then reached out a hand to touch the dog's fur. Max stayed perfectly still. He likes you, Jack said softly. The boy whispered, Dad said the ladder was broken. He didn't slip. Melissa gasped, tears filling her eyes. She looked at Olivia. If I talk, will they come for us? They already did, Olivia said. But this time, you won't be alone. Melissa nodded slowly. Then let me tell you what really happened. By evening, they had 3 more testimonies, each one echoing the same story. Threats, silence, missing paperwork. Olivia recorded every word, labeling the files carefully. Max became a quiet bridge between fear and courage. Every time a frightened worker hesitated, the dog's calm presence seemed to anchor them. Back at the cabin, Jack lit the stove and spread the papers across the table. Olivia sat opposite, exhaustion written in her face, but her eyes were alive again. You've done something I couldn't do, she said. You made them remember. Jack poured her coffee. You made them speak. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muting the world in white. Max lay by the door, his head resting on his paws, watching the fire flicker. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel hostile. It felt alive, full of voices trying to rise from under years of dust. Olivia looked up suddenly. Jack, when we print this, they'll come after us. Jack met her gaze. Then we better make sure it's worth it. Max's ears perked, his eyes fixed on the window. In the reflection of the glass, a faint beam of headlights glided past the house and stopped. Neither Jack nor Olivia moved. The snow outside glowed faintly red from the brake lights, unmoving. Then, slowly, they faded into darkness. Jack whispered, They already know. Max growled low, the sound rumbling like distant thunder. Chapter 5. Light, justice, and a real home. Dawn came to Maple Ridge with a silence that felt different this time. Not the silence of fear, but of relief beginning to take its first breath. Frost clung to the windows, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. Jack stood at the porch railing, coffee warming his hands, watching the sunrise burn away the last haze of snow. Max was stretched out at his feet, his coat shimmering gold under the light, one ear flicking lazily at the sound of a bird breaking the morning calm. Inside the cabin, Olivia was at the table surrounded by papers, her laptop open and a mug gone cold beside her. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. There was color in her face again, a spark that hadn't been there when Jack first met her. She wore her brown wool coat, sleeves rolled up, hair messy and unrestrained, the look of someone too focused on a fight to remember vanity. She looked up as Jack entered. "They called back," she said, voice steady but trembling faintly at the edges. "The Department of Labor, they're opening a federal investigation. They're sending inspectors next week." Jack set down his mug. "They actually listened?" Olivia smiled, half in disbelief. "They listened because we didn't whisper. You and those families? You gave them faces, not just files." Jack exhaled, shoulders sinking. For the first time in months, his chest didn't feel like it was caving in. Guess it's too late to start doubting now. Over the next few weeks, the town changed. Not overnight, but in the slow, deliberate rhythm of a place learning to breathe again. Unmarked cars appeared on Main Street. Men in suits with clipboards walked into offices that had never known scrutiny. The Maple Ridge Chronicle, under Olivia's byline, published its first front-page exposé in nearly a decade. The headline read, "The ladder was broken. The truth behind Maple Ridge's deadly silence." Each morning, more people came forward. Workers, widows, even a few local officials who'd grown tired of covering for corruption. One of them was Samuel Grant, a middle-aged building inspector with a face like weathered leather, deep grooves around his mouth, and a slight limp from an old injury. He had once been proud of his job, until orders from the mayor's office had turned him into a rubber stamp. His voice shook when he handed Olivia a folder. "I should have spoken sooner," he said, "but I've got grandkids. They threatened to take my pension." Olivia placed a hand on his arm. "You're speaking now. That matters." The investigation expanded like wildfire. Federal agents seized bank accounts under the mayor's name. Construction company executives were questioned, and the county office was raided for falsified safety reports. The mayor, Elliot Holt, once the untouchable man with the perfect smile, was led out of City Hall in handcuffs, his immaculate gray suit darkened by sleet. When the news broke, people didn't cheer. They just stood quietly in the snow, watching. One woman, Melissa Carter, whispered, "It's over." But it wasn't over. Justice wasn't the same as healing. It took longer, came slower. Jack spent his days helping the workers sort through paperwork, repair their homes, and reclaim land stripped from them. The bank that had once threatened him sent a formal letter withdrawing all claims and offering an apology signed by a new regional manager. Jack read it once, then laughed. Not bitterly, just tired. "Looks like they found their manners," he told Olivia. That spring, the town began rebuilding. The once quiet road leading to Jack's cabin came alive again. Men hauling lumber, children running through the thawing fields, women planting flowers in cracked front yards. And one morning, without warning, a small crew of workers arrived at Jack's doorstep. The man in front, Luis Ortega, was a burly welder in his 40s, skin tanned and hands scarred from years of work. He had once worked alongside Noah. His dark eyes softened when he spoke. "We heard you could use a proper roof," he said, grinning. "You gave us our names back. Let us return the favor." Before Jack could answer, Luis and his crew unloaded tools, ladders, and beams. They worked through the day, fixing the roof, rewiring the house, installing a new gas line. Someone painted the door a deep forest green. Another brought a fence for Max, who watched the whole process with regal curiosity, tail wagging slowly. At dusk, when the final nail was driven, Luis shook Jack's hand. "No more leaks, brother. You and that dog deserve a dry bed." Jack looked around, his throat tight. "You didn't have to do this." Luis smiled. "Neither did you." As night fell, the cabin glowed from within, soft golden light spilling across the snow. Olivia brewed coffee inside while Max lay near the fire, his head resting on Jack's boot. The house no longer felt haunted. It was warm, alive, real. Outside, laughter echoed, the Carter boy chasing a group of children around the new fence. their boots kicking up dust where snow once lay. The sound filled the hollow places in Jack's chest that grief had carved out long ago. Olivia appeared at the doorway, holding 2 mugs. "They're calling you a hero, you know." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no hero, just too stubborn to stay quiet." "Sometimes that's what heroes are," she said, handing him the cup. He sat back on the steps, Max settling beside him, and watched the sunset spill over the trees. The air was crisp, full of the scent of pine and coffee and the faint laughter of children who no longer looked over their shoulders. Jack took a slow breath. "We didn't run, Max." The German shepherd lifted his head, eyes reflecting the orange light. He gave a small huff, a sound halfway between a sigh and a laugh, and leaned closer, his weight warm against Jack's leg. Olivia joined them, wrapping her coat tighter. For a moment, none of them spoke. The wind carried the smell of new wood, new beginnings. Somewhere in the distance a church bell rang, not for morning this time, but for evening. Jack looked at the horizon and whispered, almost to himself, "Guess we finally made it home." And as the last light of day faded over Maple Ridge, the town seemed to exhale, not in celebration, but in peace. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. They come softly, in the loyalty of a dog who refuses to leave, in the courage of one man who chooses truth over silence, and in the hands of strangers who rebuild a broken roof simply because it's right. Maple Ridge didn't change because heaven opened. It changed because love, faith, and justice, those small sparks of the divine, found a home in ordinary people. Jack, Olivia, Max, they were never saints. But through them, God reminded us that every act of courage is a prayer, and every bit of kindness is a miracle whispered into the world. So, if you're watching this, maybe your own miracle isn't far away. Maybe it's already in your home, in your persistence, or waiting for you to stand up for what's right, even when no one's watching. May God bless you. May He grant you strength when you are weary, light when your path feels dim, and peace in the small corners of your days. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment to share what part spoke to you most. Like this video to help others find hope, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of faith, love, and second chances. Because sometimes the miracle isn't in being saved, it's in choosing to believe that we still can be.